at CHCI. And we also have Brian Lucero Contreras, who is our SoCal chapter president and current elections chair. We will be recording this session as we wish to share it with the remainder of alumni across our different channels as we open up the nominations window. And we hope that this webinar will serve as a resource as folks are deciding to run, nominate, and hopefully get elected into chapter offices. So I'll switch it over to Patty for a quick introduction, and then we'll throw the slides up and we'll get going with this webinar.
There we go. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Patty Mendoza, Director of Alumni Affairs. We're really excited for this year's election cycle. A lot of really great momentum and a lot of really great work has been done with our current national board and chapter leadership. We've continue to grow our regional chapters. We now have 9 officially as of this Monday. So we're really excited to continue to engage our alumni in these leadership opportunities. Today's session is really meant to be informational for you all, provide you all of the resources that you need as you consider nominating, self-nominating or nominating somebody else for an elected position.
Great. And Brian, do you want to introduce yourself real quick before we jump in?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Brian Lucero Contreras here, and I am the president of the SoCal chapter and also serve as this year's elections chair. So I will be going into some of our guidelines for this year's election in just a bit and walk us through some of that. So thanks, Wilson.
Great. And Patty, if you don't mind throwing up the slides, and we'll do a quick run through of the agenda. Then we'll go through some important dates. And as Brian mentioned, we'll go through some of the guidelines for voting. So as you all heard from Patty and Brian, they're helping lead the election efforts this year. Myself, as your national president, I get to speak a bit about being on the national board. Today, we're also going to go over the specific timeline for nominations, as well as the election period and when we will be announcing the 2023 board. We will dive really quickly into some of the expectations of being on the national board and being in chapter leadership. And then lastly, we will cover those specific guidelines for election. Next slide, Patty. All right, and actually I'm going to hand this over to Patty, who will go over the timeline for elections. A lot of this process is going to be managed by CHCI and our elections chair. So I'll let Patty talk a bit more about those specific dates and announcements as they will be released.
Thank you, Jose. So as you can see here, we have outlined our elections timeline, starting with nominations. This is the opportunity where folks could either self-nominate if someone's interested in running for a position, or if they'd like to nominate somebody else, right? We have great leaders in our alumni network, and maybe there's somebody that you just feel needs that nudge to consider running for an elected position. This is the opportunity to do so. So as you see, we have a little bit over a week slotted for nominations. It'll be a Google form. We will be providing you all with a link to the website where this information will be found. We will be sharing the slide deck as well, so just for folks' awareness. So after the nominations comes the election period. During the nominations and elections period, what we do internally is go through all of the nominations submitted, and then create the campaign slates for folks that are going to be running. Some of the things that we do on our end is, one, confirming that folks are alums and are in good standing. And then we will have nomination slates on our website so that folks can make informed decisions as they're submitting their votes. Similarly, will be done through a Google form, will be on our website. And following that, we will have our announcement. And so it'll be the following week, more than likely towards the end of the week, as we will tally all of the votes and again, make those verifications. There is no interviews for folks who are interested in running. However, the only position that requires an additional level of vetting and an actual vote is for folks who are interested in running for the national board president. And the reason for that is because that position actually sits on our board as well, CHCI's board of directors. So the vote, the national president is also voted in by our national board. And then the board is installed on 2nd of January, and that we will get into, the difference between our national board and our regional chapters as well. But sort of as a next step, we go through this process. The next step is sort of the onboarding. In tradition, following tradition, there is transition meetings that are held between current outgoing board members and newly elected officers. And so that'll happen as soon as all of the results become available. And then we will have a virtual pre-orientation. And these pre-orientations and overnight retreat are just for our elected regional chapter presidents and for our entire national board. And so this is, again, just for awareness. We have some tentative dates here on hold, to be determined as we will connect with the newly elected folks to solidify the dates, but just wanted to make sure that folks were aware sort of the quick turnaround time from election transition to hitting the ground running with orientations and retreats. So next, I'll pass it off to Brian, or I think Jose actually, who's going to talk a little bit about what the national board is and the positions that are currently going to be on the ballot for nominations.
Thank you, Patty. And just real quick, for the sake of time, as folks are looking at the different positions on the national board, we do have descriptions that will be available for folks to read through, specifically roles and responsibilities. I can share a bit of what the national board does. We do meet on a monthly basis, and we meet with all chapter presidents. Specifically, the president, as Patty mentioned, also has the privilege of sitting on the board of CHCI, and that oversees and has a vote with 6 other members on the national board from everything from CHCI, labor relations, projects that CHCI is putting forward, and then we serve as a liaison to the Alumni Association and representing the different chapters and work that happens across the country. This year, we actually rebranded all of the positions to be vice presidents. And so we have a national vice president, we have a vice president of professional development, we have a vice president of communications, and a vice president of civic engagement. All these vice presidents work in tandem with the national president to help lead and create programming for the chapters. As you all know, we're coming out of a pandemic, and so we were limited to a lot of virtual engagement over the last years. But the hope is that going back into person engagement, we will be able to have a lot more, on-site engagement at CHCI as they're starting to also go out to regional areas where our chapters are held. Our communications is actively working alongside a CHCI staff to build and continue to grow the brand of the Alumni Association as well as CHCI. And then obviously our civic engagement chair will be responsible for working with our week of service and building out professional development as well across the chapters. These are 5 positions that are going to be up for nomination and election this year. And like I said, the role of the national board is to serve as a steward for the chapters and to work in tandem with the chapter presidents to help guide a national agenda of engagement. And to talk a bit more about that national agenda and what happens locally, I'll turn it over to Brian to talk about his experience as chapter president, and to talk a bit about some of the roles, as well as the chapters that we have currently open for nominations and running. Brian?
Great. Thanks, Jose. Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, I serve as president for the Southern California chapter. I joined the chapter, what was then called the LA area chapter, back in 2013, really fresh out of my program with CHCI. I was a fall 2012 intern. And over the years, I've had the privilege of serving in many different roles, all the way up to president, but also serving under many different leaders and different presidents throughout my time with the board, and it's been just a really great experience. So I wanted to just share a little bit about like what that's looked like, and I'll dive into our current existing chapters. But I think overall, being an alumni leader is just a really good opportunity to give back to CHCI and to play a role in how we're developing as an association post participating in the program. It is a time commitment. I think as you're considering, running for one of these positions, just know that we're all volunteers for this, and it does require a little bit of planning, a little bit of time commitment. But the fun part is you really get to think creatively and collaboratively, not only with your like existing chapter members and those in your board locally, but also across other region and across other chapters. And so for me, it's been a really awesome experience just meeting other alumni from other chapters, getting a chance to connect with them in other ways. We have an annual retreat where, I think this year was our first offsite outside of DC. And so that was really fun. And again, there's opportunities to engage and give back to CHCI after you've graduated for the program. So currently we have 9 active alumni chapters, and I'll just kind of read through these: Chicago, Dallas, Houston, New York, Phoenix, South Florida, San Antonio, Southern California, and Washington, D.C. The chapters with an asterisk are new chapters that have either reformed or have become active recently. And so that's why you see that on here. Each chapter has a structure that's been in place pretty consistently over the years, but it does kind of change chapter to chapter. And so, the titles here are president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, and program and outreach coordinator. I know when I joined, I joined as a program and outreach coordinator, and then over the years we changed the titles to kind of engage more folks and kind of make it a little bit more appealing to folks so that they can join the chapter. And I think there's flexibility there, but this is really the structure that we followed over the last few years to maintain some consistency across other regional chapters. And if you can go on to the next slide. So I'm going to walk us through some of our candidate eligibility guidelines. But before I do that, I want to just thank our 2020 elections committee and task force who did a lot of the heavy lifting in really laying the groundwork and the foundation for this elections process. And so I just want to call out Humberto, Emily, Janine, Naomi, and Jessica for all of their great work on this. And so I'll kind of just dive in. So in order to be eligible for CHCI elected leadership office, candidates must have successfully completed a CHCI leadership program. You must be able to serve a full 2-year term. So in this case, it would be 2020 to 2025. And for regional chapters, you must reside within 100 miles of the designated chapter metro area. So an example, like I currently live in San Francisco, and so technically, I'm stepping down from the board, but we do ask that folks who are running for their respective chapters are within that 100-mile kind of radius. And you must have a demonstrated commitment to CHCI and or CHCI Alumni Association mission and programs. And so I think this is really demonstrated in your commitment to even volunteer for a role like this. So again, this is sort of the eligibility criteria that we've laid out for those who are interested in running. Go on to the next slide. So we're going to send out communication with a link to the candidate form, but this is really kind of what we'll use to gather your information for your campaign platform, which will be shared with the candidate announcements. There are also campaign materials on CHCI's website, and we are encouraging folks who are going to be running to submit a video for CHCI to post on official CHCI social media accounts. And so it'll be one campaign video for candidates up to 5 minutes. And this is your opportunity to really talk about why you're running and have that be shared by CHCI directly. We are encouraging candidates to share posts throughout the campaign period on their personal accounts, but you should be refrained from tagging any individual alumni. And so Patty will kind of walk through what some of those guidelines are around professional decorum and data use policy and solicitations. But just a quick piece on tagging individual alumni. We want to make sure that this is a fair election. And so over the last few years, we've put these guidelines in place to really make sure that folks are adhering to a set process and that it is fair, and that we're also being transparent as an organization with those who are part of this process. And with that, I will hand it over to Patty.
Thank you, Brian. So just kind of picking up where, as Brian was starting to mention, some of the guidelines when folks move into, once we move into our election phases, we want to be supportive, right, of sharing all of the information of all of the candidates, but we want to make sure that everything remains professional. So as you see here, these are the expectations, right, that all campaigns should comply and reflect the values of CHCI, both in official on the platforms and on social media accounts. So no candidates can utilize group email or listservs or contact databases. Ways that we support, again, is by creating space for one post with one video. You could encourage folks to, like the post or to reshare, to, get the word out. But we ask that you do not, utilize listservs or, previous emails that you have for your candidacy. We want to make sure that it's fair, a fair election, and not everyone has listservs of alumni. And so for that reason, we want to make sure that it's something that no candidate participates in. And also, refraining any surrogates from engaging with alumni directly. Again, the emails, the phone, the call, the text, the DMs. But again, you can encourage folks to like and share your social media posts. In the event that we do have a violation, as Brian mentioned, thanks to our previous committee, we have a formalized violation reporting process. And this form, so we have a violation form that will live in our nominations and elections website. In the event that we find someone who has a violation, they will be disqualified from the election cycle. We encourage everyone to submit make an entry in the violation form if you find that someone does violate the process. And again, examples of violations are negative ads and campaigns against opponents, and violation of candidate rules. So that kind of wraps up with, we know it's very high level, but we wanted to create space to share this information with everyone so that everyone makes informed decisions if you're considering on running. And if so, you have all of the information. We do have here a QR code that takes you to our elections website. You will find all of the information we shared today there. In addition to the link to today's recording, the slides as well, an FAQ document, the link to the nomination form is there as well. It will go live this evening, so folks can start submitting nominations immediately following today's webinar. So I will pause there and see if there are any questions for Jose, Brian, or myself. If I know that sometimes we need time to just kind of process information shared. If questions come to you later, I encourage you to email us at this email address. And we will be keeping an eye on it, and we'll be responding to all folks through this email address. Do we have any questions or just thoughts from folks here?
I do have a question. This is probably for Jose. Hi, Jose. Hi, Brian. It's nice to see you both. Can you share a little bit more about your commitment to the board? Like, how often do you all, so with the actual like CHCI board, how often are you involved with them? And do you meet, like, what does that look like for you time-wise?
Yeah, so the board does meet on a quarterly basis, and this is the CHCI Institute board. You do have an active vote as part of the board, so you're one of the 5 or 6 board of directors. I currently sit on the finance committee, and so we look at everything from proposed budgets, fundraising, salaries, whatnot, and so that is part of the commitment. I know that previous national board presidents have sat in different committees, so it also just depends on the interest, but then also how the board votes you in. So in time commitment, again, because my tenure was during COVID, a lot of it has been through Zoom, and so it's been a max of like 2 hours when we bring the board together, and then there also CHCI does have an advisory board. Which is representatives from elected offices and corporate partners. And so they also have an added time for board meetings. But it is quarterly, so it's probably 4 to 5 times throughout the year, an average of like 2 to 3 hours, I would say max. Again, we're going back to in-person engagement. And so actually the end of the year board meeting is coming up soon. But that I would say throughout the year is about 10 to 12 hours, and then also committee work in terms of reviewing budgets and finance organizations to do like taxes and whatnot. So it's not time consuming. I think the bulk of the work in managing this board and CHCI will come in. I think I talk to Patty every other day, because of the different programs that we're trying to execute, and then also on a monthly basis with the entire group. I presume that'll be a little bit more time consuming as we start engaging in-person events, but yeah, I would say between 10 to 15 hours would be the bulk of the time spent.
Well, thank you.
And so I had a quick question, and thanks, Jose, for quantifying that. What does the handoff look like from the exiting leadership to those that would be presuming the upcoming next 2 years?
And I can take that, Patty. So usually we have your counterpoint. You have a meet. So I met with our national board when I came in. I met with our national VP when I came in. And so that transition period that Patty mentioned, I believe it was the penultimate week of December. That is when you are supposed to arrange meetings. Let's say your incoming chapter president, you would meet with the outgoing chapter president. We will coordinate with CHCI the transfer of like logins and whatnot into the drive and access to social media. But it's mostly a chance for you all to kind of chat about, challenges, what were some of the successes, ideas. There has been instances where, there hasn't been a transition meeting because it's right around the holidays and folks get busy. And that is why we also are hosting that orientation meeting But then we also have the retreat to make sure folks really have a clear understanding of their role, but also more importantly, have a clear sense of what are the resources and tools available to them. So there is a transition period at the end of December, but then also we have an orientation and retreat where we build our strategic plan as a board.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts or questions?
One last thing I was going to mention, the email address that you see online on the screen right now, that is going to serve as the official communications channel for both Patty and Brian and CHCI staff. If there are violations that folks need to report or concerns with the elections process, this would be the direct and official channel that you would utilize just to ensure, again, transparency and a clear election process.
Yeah, and on that note, I'm not running for re-election or future office for my chapter, and so one of the requirements to also be part of our elections task force is that any officer is not seeking to be on any board locally or at the national level. So Patty and I will kind of manage that so that we're transparent with this process.
Can I clarify one thing? Are we able to say, like, if we have someone that's an alum that we want to encourage to run for a position, can we say, hey, I'm thinking about running for this role. Would you be interested in running for so-and-so? Or is that something we just can't say at all? Like, I guess I'm trying to figure out where is the line for what can and cannot be said in terms of communicating individually with people.
So during the election process, that is when solicitation isn't permissible, and solicitation would be me sending folks here a DM on Instagram or a text message saying, "Hey, can you endorse me or can you vote for me?" That is what's not permissible. I can definitely send you a text and be like, "Hey, I shared this on social media. If you're willing to support me, feel free to share," or even on the social media post saying, if you support my candidacy, go ahead and share. But something that has happened years prior, folks started, collecting a list of endorsements, or as Patty mentioned, folks would have access to phone numbers and listservs. And so we want to prevent folks from kind of being badgered into voting for someone. You can definitely encourage folks. Let's say you're running for a position and you want someone to nominate themselves, you're more than welcome to do so. That wouldn't be considered solicitation. It's only during the election period that solicitation would be an issue. But yes, definitely encourage folks to run. We don't have, as previous years we had slates of folks running. We're not doing so because, again, that created a bit of a mess up, and so we're encouraging folks to run individually. But you can definitely self-nominate and nominate others to run, and then they still have to accept the nomination in order to be part of the slate, which CHCI and Patty will announce.
Yeah, and I would just add too, like, once CHCI hosts and communicates, if you want to forward that on to encourage folks, we definitely want that. It's once we get into the actual process where we can't do any solicitation or publicly like endorse anyone or candidate and so forth. It's a good question.
Yeah, and it is permissible that you as an individual can share content of a candidate that, that CHCI nor the Alumni Association can control. If you, Claudia, support, Brian's candidacy for X position, it's your personal social media and you can share accordingly. That, we can't prove.
And hi, baby.
Mm-hmm. We love guests. We love guests on our chat. Any other thoughts or questions, Brian, or Jose, anything else you want to add in closing, or Claudia, Adriana, are there any last questions for us?
I would just say encourage folks to run. We have, we're going to make public the list of positions by chapter as well as those listed on the national board. So definitely encourage folks to run. I think for Brian and myself that have served in multiple positions in the Alumni Association, our ultimate goal is to continue the work that CHCI does, to continue building on the legacy of alums that have come before us. And so the more the merrier, and chapters can always use all the help that they can get in order to move their agendas forward. So please share widely. And I know folks are going to be watching this outside of those that are present today. So if you do have questions, definitely do not hesitate to reach out to the national board or the elections chair, Brian and Patty as well.
Real quickly, just one thing that I've noticed when I've tried to repost from the CHCI alumni page on Instagram, it doesn't let me. Is that just me, or is that something with you all that needs to change? Because I would love to be able to repost it, but for some reason it doesn't. It just lets me send it to individual people, but not repost.
Thank you for sharing that, Claudia. I wasn't aware. It might be like a setting that we have on the account. So I'll connect with our communications team. I had no idea. So this is helpful to know because we rely on the alums to continue to like reshare information. So I was just under the impression folks were doing that.
And just to clarify, Claudia, do you mean like a post from like the grid, or do you mean like a story?
Sorry, a story. Yeah, from the story.
Yeah, that might be like a setting, Patty.
Yeah, it might be a setting because usually you're able to share posts and stories if like CHCI makes it available, but but we can chat offline because I know myself, I share CHCI stuff often. But yeah, you should be able to. So
I could see that I could repost like a I don't know, like a post, but I think when I've tried to repost the stories, that's where I run into issues.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, we'll fix that. Thank you for letting us know. All right, folks. Well, if there's nothing else, thank you so much for, thank you, Brian, for your leadership, and Jose for your continued leadership, Claudia and Adriana for joining us today, and your interest in our election process and, nominations. Again, the conversation doesn't end here. So for you all or other folks that, might rewatch this later, please do reach out to us through this email, and Brian and I will follow up with you all. So thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Patty.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.